Alright, yeah, welcome back to some more Magic Duels. This week I'm going to be taking a look at a subscriber deck submitted to us by Cinder Nagard Sorensen. Can't remember if that's how I pronounce your name. It's probably not, so I apologise in advance, but also thank you for the deck list. So, we're going to be playing a Thopter deck this week. So this is a Jeskai Thopters deck that intends on going very, very wide, around turn 5 or turn 6. We want to go for the win. So the way that we end up doing that is we obviously generate a lot of Thopters with certain creatures. We then double up on those Thopters using things like Anointed Procession, and then we can even use Saheeli Rai as a win con as well with her -2 ability. So let's start right at the very beginning anyway, guys. So we want to make sure that we've got all 3 colours of our lands, so that we've got the Renegade maps in order to do that. It's a 1-mana artifact that enters the battlefield tapped. And when it untaps, you can tap it, sacrifice it, and search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, and put it into your hand, and shuffle your library. We want to make sure that we do this because we want all 3 colours on turn 3, so that we can make use of Radiant Flames. We need 2 of those 3 colours for Saheeli Rai on turn 3. And then our turn 4 as well, we need our white for Anointed Procession. So we really want to be curving out as best as possible with our mana. So we're going with Renegade maps. We're not running... we are actually running Evolving Wild, sorry. But we're also running Renegade maps in order to trigger the artifact on things like Thopter Spy Network. After that, we've got Essence Flux. This is a 1 blue mana instant speed spell. It says, exile target creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. If it's a spirit, put a 1/1 counter on it. Not relevant. The first bit is what we want it for, essentially. It's a 1 mana flicker spell, so we're running 3 copies of this. So if you imagine that we have ourselves a turn 4, or a turn 5 Whirler Rogue, let's say. We cast for 4 mana with the Whirler Rogue, we get 2 Thopters. Our opponent tries to remove the Whirler Rogue, and then in response we use 1 blue mana to flicker it out of the way and generate more Thopters and keep it safe. And with an Anointed Procession on the board as well, we end up doubling all of that. So we can put these creatures down early game before we've got Anointed Procession and things like that, because we know that late game, after the Anointed Procession, we've actually got Essence Flux somewhere down the line in order to re-trigger those Enter the Battlefield abilities and get those tokens back again. So it's really sweet for that. We then got Telling Time, so this helps us find all of our little combo pieces, but it also allows us to make sure that we hit our mana on time. All sorts, really. So it's a 1 and a blue, instant speed. Look at the top 3 cards of your library. Put 1 of those into your hand, 1 on top of your library, and 1 on the bottom. So we essentially get to take 2 cards out of those 3. Not always do we want the card that we put on top, so we do have lots of shuffle effects with Renegade maps and Evolving Wilds, things like that. So we can just take 1 of them if we've got the right setup anyway. We then have Harness Lightning. This is pretty much one of our better removal spells. So for 1 and a red instant speed, choose target creature. You get 3 energy. Then you may spend any amount of energy to deal that much damage to that creature. So we can spend as much energy as we have available to us. We do run Glimmer of Genius to gain 2 more energy, so that helps pump that up. And we also run Ether Hubs as well. We do need energy for the Ether Hubs, so the Harness Lightning could be used to recharge our hubs, as it were. But we can also use the energy we gain from that as well to take down maybe a 4 toughness creature on turn 2, that kind of thing, if that ever became a thing. We then have Declaration in Stone, so this is our anti-token strategy essentially, but it's also a pretty good removal for absolutely anything other than vehicles, of course. It is sorcery speed, which is the downside. However, it's 1 and a white, which means it's easily castable, and you exile target creature and all other creatures its controller controls with the same name as that creature, so every single copy of that creature on the board gets exiled. And then the player investigates for each non-token creature exiled this way. So if they are going for a token strategy, we actually can Declaration in Stone their Scions, their Servos, that kind of thing. And it'll get rid of all of them. Should be noted as well, though, if you do try it on a Scion and they sack it in response, this will fizzle, so you got to be aware of that. We then have Master Trinketeer. So this is a 3/2 for 3, 2 and a white. It is a creature that gives Servos and Thopters +1/+1. So I found that this is mostly here for the victory swings, essentially. It's not really here for the secondary ability. The secondary ability is 3 and a white to create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token. This is mostly here for when you've already got the board state in place and you've already got all of your servos, but you're not quite there on damage. Well, you can actually give all your Thopters +1/+1 and swing over the top. We don't usually have 4 mana to spare in order to make those servos, but I imagine after a board wipe, if we play a Trinketeer, then we've got a nice little mana sink that we can put some of our energy into. We then have Thopter Engineer, really good Thopter generator here. So this is a 2 and a red, 1/3 creature. When it enters the battlefield, you get a 1/1 colorless Thopter creature token with flying onto the battlefield, and all artifact creatures you control have haste. So when we actually start making mass copies of like Whirler Rogues and things like that are generating 4 tokens each, and we're making copies of the Whirler Rogues that are also making 4 copies each, Thopter Engineer allows them to have haste the turn that we start going mental. So as soon as we actually go too wide for our opponent to survive, we don't have to worry about the summon sickness, which gives them a turn essentially to react to it. We'll just kill them straight on the spot right then and there. So Thopter Engineer's really awesome. We then have 2 copies of Radiant Flames. So for 2 and a red, sorcery speed, this one has Converge. And Converge means essentially you can its power is dependent on the colours that you use to cast it. So it deals X damage to each creature, where X is the number of colours of mana spent to cast Radiant Flame. So this is the board wipe if things aren't going well, essentially. We can do up to 3 damage to each creature on the board, if we so choose to do so. It does kind of destroy our board state a little bit, but we're only really going to be using it if our board state isn't there in the first place. So that's why Radiant Flames are here. We'll see if they're useful, but I imagine we won't be using them too much. So then we have Saheeli Rai. This is one part of a really sweet combo. So for 1, a blue and a red, 3 loyalty, you get to +1 and scry 1, and Saheeli deals 1 damage to each opponent. Not the best thing in the world, but it does allow us to maybe get that 4th land for our Anointed Procession, and gets her to 4 loyalty, which is a nice little sweet spot for Saheeli as well. Her -2 ability is what we really want her here for, though. We'll almost certainly be casting this as many times as possible. So you get to create a token that is a copy of a target artifact or creature you control, except for it's an artifact in addition to its other types. That token gains haste, and it's exiled at the beginning of the next end step. So we create a token of any creature on our side. So we create a token of Whirler Rogue, for example. Whirler Rogue enters as an artifact, and it gets its enter the battlefield trigger again, so we get 2 more Thopter tokens. Well, if you join that alongside Anointed Procession is 3 and a white enchantment. If an effect you control would create 1 or more tokens under your control, it creates twice as many of those tokens instead. So, when we minus Saheeli with Anointed Procession on the board, we actually create 2 copies of Whirler Rogue. And those Whirler Rogues create 4 Thopter tokens. So we actually generate 2 2/2s and 4 8/1/1s. Just off of a single minus on Saheeli if we've got the Anointed Procession. And then if we've got the Thopter Engineer in play, well, then now they've got haste and they can swing in over the top as well. So it's pretty sweet. Nice little combo there. The -7 ability I don't see us really using. Search your library for up to 3 artifact cards with the same names, put them onto the battlefield and shuffle your library. The only artifacts we actually have in this deck are Renegade maps, so we really don't want to be using that ultimate. And we'll probably never even get close to it either, because we want to be using the -2 as often as possible. So, Whirler Rogue, we briefly touched upon this. 2 and 2 blue for a 2/2. Enters the battlefield, puts 2/1/1 Thopter tokens onto the battlefield. However, it does also have another ability which may or may not be useful. Tap 2 untapped artifacts you control. Target creature cannot be blocked this turn. So we get to create an unblockable creature whenever we want. We don't really run high-powered creatures. We're kind of going for that go-wide strategy, so we've got a lot of very little creatures. But if our opponent's on 2 damage, 2 health, for example, and we've got just enough to get through in terms of unblockable damage, then we can actually make some use out of that. Then have Pia and Kieran Nala. So for 2 and 2 red, this is essentially the red version of Whirler Rogue, but it's got, well, it's legendary for a start, so you can't have more than 1 on the board. And it also has a secondary ability as well, which is a nice little bit of burn. So it's a 4 mana 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, it puts 2 1/1 colours Thopter artifact creature tokens with flying onto the battlefield. So yet again, with the Anointed Procession, that's 4 instead. Its other ability, though, allows us to bypass combat damage, essentially. We can pay 2 and a red to sacrifice an artifact. Pir and Kira Nala deal 2 damage to target creature or player. So that 1/1 can actually be a 2 damage burn spell if we want it to be, essentially. And if we're actually sacrificing things on the end step with Saheeli Rai, maybe we want to sacrifice those artifact copies of Whirler Rogue, for example, to swing at our opponent before they get exiled. We then have Anointed Procession. So, essentially, Anointed Procession is a 4-mana enchantment that doubles all token generators. So if you imagine that the value of a Whirler Rogue is... Essentially, this is a 2/2 that generates 2 1/1 flyers. That's 4 points of damage, except for 2 of them have got flying. Good on its own. However, with Anointed Procession, now we deal 4 points of flying damage. So it's actually kind of like a 6/6 for 4. With mostly flying. So you can see that the value on most of our creatures is actually doubled alongside the tokens that we're doubling as well. Same goes for Pir and Kira Nala. We also generate 2 extra... Well, we generate 2 Thopters with the Engineer. So we've got a 1/3 on the ground and 2 1/1s in the air for 3. So all of the values there. We then have Thopter Spy Network. This is 2 and 2 blue, an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control an artifact, put a 1/1 colours Thopter artifact creature token with flying onto the battlefield. Then, whenever 1 or more artifact creatures you control would deal combat damage to a player, you get to draw a card. So all of our Thopters, very hard to block, very much likely to generate us some card draw as well. So we get a nice little bit of card advantage from all of the Thopters we're generating. If we combine that with Anointed Procession, then Thopter Spy Network will actually generate us 2 colourless Thopter artifact every single turn, which is pretty sweet. We want to try and keep a Renegade map around on the board as well if we've got that set up, because this is a non-creature artifact, which means it's a little bit harder to deal with. If in case of a board wipe and we don't have Renegade maps, we'll no longer generate any Thopters on our upkeep if we don't have any Thopters available, short of the Renegade map. So if you have one around, don't sack it unless you need the mana from it. We then have 2 Glimmer of Genius. So for 3 and a blue, instant speed, scry 2, then draw 2, and gain 2 energy. So we get to go 4 cards deep, essentially. We get to scry to the top 2. If we don't like them, we put them to the bottom, or we keep one of them and draw 2. We draw another one. We also get 2 energy as well, which is useful for our Ether Hubs and for our Harness Lightnings. Next, we've got Maverick Thopterist. So for 3, a blue and a red, we've got a 2/2 with Improvise. So a 2/2 for 5 is disgustingly bad. A 2/2 for 5 that generates 2 Thopters is okay. However, this can be as cheap as a blue and a red because of Improvise. So Improvise says that your artifacts can help you cast this spell, and each artifact that you tap alongside casting it takes 1 mana off of it. So if you've got 3 Thopters on the board, we can tap those 3 Thopters to play a Thopterist, which makes a 2/2 with 2 1/1s. So we're actually kind of untapping some Thopters as well. They do have Summoning Sickness, of course, but this can be essentially a decent way to get out more Thopters, which is quite nice. For quite cheap as well. Then we've got Dusk Till Dawn. So Dusk is 2 and 2 white for a sorcery speed. Destroy all creatures with power 3 or greater. So this is our board wipe that rarely touches our creatures. Everything you may notice is below 3 power. So short of the Master Trinketeer, of course, which I think is an acceptable loss for wiping our opponent's board. If our opponent's going big, essentially we get to kill all of their stuff. On the other side, we've got Dawn. So Dawn is an Aftermath card. It's 3 and 2 white for a sorcery speed card. Return all creature cards with power 2 or less from your graveyard to your hand. So as we mentioned, none of our creatures are above 3, which means that any creature that's in our graveyard gets put back into our hand with Dawn. Short of the Master Trinketeer again, every single creature is fetchable with Dawn, which is pretty sweet, which allows us to rebuild after a board wipe, which makes it not so bad for having Radiant Flames, essentially. We can get some value straight out of that. That's essentially the deck anyway, guys. If you want to check out the mana, we've got 2 plains, 3 islands, and 3 mountains. As we mentioned, we've got Renegade maps to grab basics. We also have Evolving Wilds to grab basics as well. So we need plenty to grab, but also because they allow us to make Prairie Streams and things like that untapped. So a Prairie Stream is a plains and an island that enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands. So we need our basics, essentially. Cliff Drop Retreat is a tap land unless you control a mountain or a plain. So this can come into play untapped as soon as turn 2. So we can actually even Prairie Stream tapped turn 1, and then Clifftop Retreat turn 2, and we've got 2 dual lands, which is pretty sweet. This is all of our colours available right then and there, which is something that's quite important to us. We then have the Sulphur Falls, which is essentially Clifftop Retreat's blue-red version. Comes into play tapped unless you control an island or a mountain. And then Glacial Fortress, which is yet again the same thing. Comes into play tapped unless you control a plains or an island. We then have 1 copy of Inventor's Fair. Inventor's Fair, not sure it's entirely necessary in this deck, but it does allow us to gain life, which can help us stabilise in the late game, I suppose. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 3 or more artifacts, which is quite likely, you gain 1 life. It is a colourless mana, which is not ideal. And then we've got the secondary ability, which is pay 4, tap it, sacrifice it, and search for an artifact card. The reason I don't think it's entirely necessary is because the only thing we can grab is a Renegade map, and I don't really want to sack a land to grab a land. So, yeah, I'm not sure about the Inventor's Fair in this one. It seems like it fits perfectly, but I'm not sure it does enough. We'll see, though, won't we? We'll get the Ether Hubs after that, though. Ether Hubs are essentially 5 colour lands, 3 colour in this sense. Enters the battlefield, you gain 1 energy. We can use that for the Harness Lightning, or we can use it for the Ether Hub itself. Normally, it just adds 1 colour to your mana pool. However, you can pay an energy and add 1 mana of any colour to your mana pool. So, yeah, it's essentially a 5 colour land. Yet again, helps us get all 3 colours on turn 3. And then we've got 4 copies of Evolving Wilds to thin out our deck as well, and make sure that we've got the lands that we need. Alright guys, that's essentially going to do it for the deck tech. If you do like the look of the deck, then be sure to check out the matches that shall be following shortly after. There will be a link in the end card if that's something that interests you. Like and subscribe, don't forget to hit that little bell icon as well, and you'll get notifications when these videos go live. I do hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.